Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's the 7th of May, first Thursday of the month, and I'm back here at St. Ambrose Church with Karen Wright filming. Continuing to read from what I'm calling The Right Place at the Right Time, Memoir of a Kentucky Priest. And the section that we're in is what I call 1947 back to 1633. 1947 being my birth, 1633 being the birth of Catholicism in Kentucky, at least that branch of Catholicism from which my Kentucky ancestors on my father's side came. I will also talk about my mother's ancestors and how they came to Kentucky. But this portion that we're in right now, we started yesterday, portion 3, and it is really pretty tightly around Bardstown, the development of the cathedral. We covered the arrival of Bishop Flagey yesterday, the first bishop of the Midwest, the person for whom I'm named. We talked a bit about his goals. He wanted to have a cathedral, a seminary, and an order of women religious. We'll go further into those goals and see how he more than achieves them. And today's section, or second portion of this section 3, then is going to go into some of the those developments, but also of the, I think, remarkable amount of Catholic leadership that comes from Flagey and his colleagues. They were foreign missionaries who came to Kentucky, but within one generation, they raised spiritual leaders who continue their work here and then who also contribute to the larger church. I had just talked a bit about, well, actually in quite a bit of detail about how the different levels of clericalism, clerical ordination, the different orders. I talked about the religious orders versus the diocesan priest. I also talked about the minor orders, major orders, and the last thing I mentioned was the type of masses, high masses, low masses, pontifical masses. And so now we resume. The scene is St. Thomas Farm, what Flagey called the plantation. It's where the church continues to serve today, and the development of some of his, Flagey's, first companions. So here we go. As we have seen, seminarians Schaeffer and Derigot, Schaeffer being a Belgian, Derigot being a Frenchman, had entered major orders as priest and deacon by the middle of 1815. We can surmise that the ceremonies had to be somewhat modified and surely rather cramped. They took place in the cabin that still stands at St. Thomas. Not the church, but the cabin. However, that crampedness would not continue to be the case. Webb, quoting the correspondence of David, reflects again the eagerness of this band of immigrant clergy to establish their faith tradition formally. Their enthusiasm was perhaps born more from a desire to affirm the faith and reward the patience of those people who had transplanted themselves from Maryland fully 3 decades earlier. Providence and the largesse of Thomas and Anne Gloff Howard had provided the location, and now David could write, quote, "After 5 years, we finally succeeded in building a brick church, 65 feet long by 30 feet wide. The interior is not yet sufficiently ornamented for want of means. It is, however, in a condition sufficiently decent for the divine oblation. The bishop officiates in it on all the great feasts, and in it 3 ordinations have already taken place. He is writing in November of 1817, and one of the ordinations would have been that of Jacques Derrida on the 1st of January of that year. The last of those who had studied in the Flatboat Seminary, coming down the river, Derrida had entered the priesthood at the relatively advanced age of 34. And a man whose health was never really robust, he would serve effectively, but only for about 10 years. In addition to serving the parishes in Nelson County, Bardstown, Fairfield, Poplar Neck, he was energetic in the development of the formational programs of St. Thomas. These included the Female Academy, which the sisters had begun in the winter of 1813 and 14, and would in 1819 name Bethlehem for the birthplace of the Lord. Then there was the seminary, which as the continuation of the program first begun on the flatboat, would continue training students for the priesthood. An order of religious brothers who would live as a community of shared prayer and possessions and take the lead in training for trades such as carpentry, clockmaking, farming, and implement manufacture. And there was an elementary curriculum for boys, which it was hoped would provide recruits for the seminary and for the order of brothers. As had the Cistercians, and you know that word means Trappist, as had the Cistercians 20 years before them, the Brothers of the Sacred Heart moved to Casey County, about 75 miles to the southeast. However, the leader, Father Derrida, succumbed to illness in August of 1827. Having brought him back for burial at St. Thomas, where he had served so well, the little community of brothers soon disbanded. Father Schaefer served in parish ministry, riding the circuit of settlements to the west, in Hardin, Meade, Grayson, and Breckinridge counties. Families who had come to the settlements of the League of 60 in Nelson, Washington, and Marion counties would move on to the west over Castell and Hardinsburg in Breckinridge County, and as far west as Waverly, just south of the Ohio River in Union County. But he too suffered from poor health, which must have deteriorated with the hardship of such travel. He returned to Europe in 1818. As rigorous as this frontier ministry no doubt was, these missionaries inspired during the time that the new bishop and his companions were living at St. Stephen's Farm, a small community of women in the vicinity of St. Charles Church in the Hardins Creek community had begun teaching their young siblings, nieces, and nephews. This good idea quickly grew in both the students and the teachers. These young women approached Father Nearings with their idea of religious community. On the 25th of April of 1812, Mary Rhodes, Anne Havern, and Christina Stewart received veils, and the first community of women religious in Kentucky was born. They were the first in America without ties to a European order. By the 29th of June, they were joined by Ann Rhodes, Sally Havern, Nancy Rhodes, and Nellie Morgan, whose sister Ellen would join 6 weeks later. Sitting on the bare floor of their tiny cabin, they elected the youngest, Ann Rhodes, as the first superior of the Friends of Mary at the foot of the cross. However, shortly after Christmas, the ravages of consumption had taken Mother Ann, and her older sister Mary was chosen superior. By the spring of 1816, the sisters had received the donation of a home at present-day Calvary, upstream from St. Charles on the Rolling Fork River, which provided more healthy accommodations for them and their students. About 8 years later, they established what remains today as their mother house at St. Stephen's Farm. Hereafter known as the Sisters of Loretto, they were soon offering education and inspiration throughout this mission land, including a school on the present-day site of the Abbey of Gethsemane and as far west as the Missouri Territory. They would go considerably farther, and there would be many more ways in which these prophetic women would teach the church and the world. By 1816, the year in which the church at St. Thomas Farm was fully functional, the seminary, born on the boat and nurtured at St. Stephen's Farm, was growing stronger at Poplar Neck as it continued to receive students from Europe, from the eastern states of America, and from throughout the bluegrass of Kentucky. Among the more senior students, there was Robert Abel, of whose talent and dedication we have learned. There was also Charles Coombs, who had studied with the first group of Cistercians near Holy Cross. He and Abel would share the distinction of being the first Kentucky-born priests to serve the diocese, as they were ordained by Bishop Flagey at St. Thomas on the 10th of May of 1818. Coombs would also have to be distinguished from at least 3 other priests named Coombs, including another Charles, and Walter Coombs, the man to whom Robert Abel had given last rites. There were also Robert and William Byrne, who in spite of the same surname came from different backgrounds and would have different ways of serving the infant diocese. Philip Hostin, another in the line of Belgian immigrants, had completed much of his study when he arrived at St. Thomas early in 1818. He would be the first pastor in the city of Louisville, where his ministry would be heroic, if brief. By contrast, there was Elisha Durbin, who, having been born to one of Kentucky's earliest Catholic families near Richmond in Madison County, would serve as a priest for an incredible, considering the era, 65 years. He had a bit of a head start, securing a dispensation from the required minimum age of 24. Durbin was ordained to the priesthood at 22 years and 7 months on the 21st of September of 1822 by Bishop David in the still new cathedral in Bardstown. Durbin built communities and constructed churches from Rhodelia in western Meade County all the way to Paducah, the westernmost city in the state, and from Tennessee north across Kentucky and into Perry County of Indiana. Graves County, whose western border is the shoreline of the Mississippi River, includes the community of Fancy Farm, known for its huge summer church picnic and grand political rally. It has a plaque memorializing this true apostle of the West. He rivaled Father Neris of the previous generation and left a similar legacy of dedication. In his later years, Durbin served as chaplain to 2 convents, finally reaching his eternal reward 3 months past his 87th birthday. Father Durbin was serving in the West, of course, because settlers were moving in that direction, and to and from the South as well. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson made the Louisiana Purchase, and the following year sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore that vast swath of land and stream from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Northwest. 10 years after Jacques Marquette had explored the upper part of the Mississippi from its source to present-day St. Louis, Robert de La Salle explored the southern part, naming the area where the great river meets the Gulf of Mexico, Louisiana, in honor of the Sun King, Louis XIV of France. In 1812, it became the 18th state and was followed in 1817 by Mississippi, and in 1819 by Alabama. In the same year as the purchase, Ohio joined the Union as the 17th state. Indiana followed in 1815, Illinois in 1818, and Missouri in 1824. These states and others linked their names to the tribes of the First Nations of Native Americans. As Baltimore had been at varying times part of the dioceses of Quebec, Montreal, and London until 1789, so New Orleans was part of the Diocese of Havana until 1793. Those parishes which Père Marquette and his fellow missionaries had established along the Mississippi at Cahokia, Kaskaskias, and Prairie du Rocher, as well as Vincennes on the Wabash River, long predated those which were studied here in Kentucky. So the footnote which we must always attach when we speak or write of Holy Cross as the oldest parish, St. Rose as the oldest sanctuary, St. Thomas as the oldest church, or Bardstown as the oldest diocese in the Midwest, is that there are older places, but they were not in states established at the time. Certainly, the bragging right is not the key learning point here. However, the concentration of Catholicism and the contribution of these early communities of faith in Kentucky to the larger church is both a source of inspiration and it provides a sense of rootedness for me as a Kentucky priest. The stories of these frontier priests and others also provide myriad examples of being in the right place at the right time. So I want to offer a few more elements of the picture of how central this local church was and what significant contributions it made to the expansion of the national church and beyond. This image will also provide a structure within which to examine those values and experiences which have shaped my life these several generations later. We've already noted that 1 week after the cathedral in Bardstown was filled for the dedication, it was filled again for the Episcopal ordination of Father David. This ceremony customarily requires 3 bishops to create a new one. Bishop Flagey improvised, using Neritz and Wilson as co-consecrators. Flagey's chief companion since coming to Kentucky had now become his auxiliary bishop, the first of 3 who would hold that position. A fellow Sulpician, Jean-Baptiste Marie David, was born 2 years before Flagey in a region just to the southwest of Paris. They came to Maryland together, and both served in parishes as well as in teaching positions. Flagey in Havana and David at Georgetown, both at St. Mary's in Baltimore. From the time they came to Kentucky to the time of David's death in 1841, they were a matched set, which is not to say they were always together. The opposite was closer to the truth. The focus of Bishop David's ministry would include the seminary and the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth. But he would also carry on the sacramental duties of a bishop at home during those times when Flagey needed to be away from the diocese. David also had the title of coadjutor, which carries the status of heir apparent or natural successor. Martin Spalding, who along with Guy Chabrat would be an auxiliary bishop to Flagey, has been referenced in this study as a writer of primary source material. In his History of the Early Catholic Missions of Kentucky, Spalding writes of another remarkable event which occurred in the opening days both of the proto-cathedral and the episcopal career of Bishop David. He writes, "It was the raising of 2 young men to the sublime dignity of the priesthood. It was the first time that an ordination of the kind had taken place in the cathedral, and the first time, too, that Bishop David performed this ceremony." Spalding continues for 2 paragraphs comparing and contrasting the 2 men and extolling their considerable talents and virtues before finally writing their names. Reverend William Byrne, founder of St. Mary's College, and the Reverend George Elder, founder of St. Joseph's College. Byrne was born in Ireland in 1872, and Elder was born in Kentucky 12 years later. They would receive a spiritual pedigree worthy of the ecclesiastical thoroughbreds they would become. Elder was sent to a St. Mary seminary in Maryland, not at Baltimore, but at Emmitsburg. Byrne had entered there a year earlier, having previously spent some time with the Jesuits at Georgetown. Both would transfer to St. Mary's in Baltimore by 1816. They would both receive tonsure in the minor orders, and Byrne the subdiaconate from Archbishop Carroll. Elder was recalled to Kentucky in November of 1818, where he received the subdiaconate from Bishop Flagey. Byrne followed the next spring. Then, on the 13th of that very busy month of August 1819, Flagey ordained them deacons, presumably at St. Thomas. So their bloodlines toward the priesthood include the first archbishop in America and the first 2 bishops in the Midwest. That pedigree showed itself in the enormous contribution made by this pair to ministry and to society on the frontier. In his concise history of Bellarmine University in Louisville, Clyde Cruz profiles the colleges of St. Joseph and St. Mary as, quote, predecessor institutions of Bellarmine in Kentucky, unquote. While noting the several other institutions of post-secondary and graduate education, he makes clear that what connects these 3 is that they are foundations of the Diocese of Bardstown/Louisville, as opposed to those of religious orders, such as the Dominican St. Thomas Aquinas College in Washington County. And while all three will have faculty and administrative leadership from priests in religious orders, and whose contributions will be essential, these schools will be under the auspices and direction of diocesan clergy. Thus we have Fathers Byrne and Elder, and the third founding president, Alfred Corrigan, who will appear later in these pages. As with their founding priests, the two pioneer colleges would have rather parallel lives. They begin within months of each other in unassuming locations. St. Joseph in February of 1820, and St. Mary in the next year. Students and teachers at St. Joseph first met in the priest's residence adjacent to the cathedral in Bardstown. Those of St. Mary, using kegs and barrels for desks, met their instructors in what had been a whiskey distillery. Both would have to build and rebuild after destructive fires, and both would be affected, as would all life in Kentucky, by the American Civil War, 1861 to 65. St. Joseph would be closed and used as a military hospital. St. Mary would remain open with a substantial 200 students, but the war's devastating effect on the economy reversed that situation. For 2 years, 1869 to 71, the campus would be leased to local farmers. But these were prominent as well as resilient institutions, attended by the sons of leading families throughout the country and beyond. Similarly, they would host and produce citizens of prominence. Illinois-born William Jennings Bryan, orator, statesman, and three-time major party candidate for president, was a commencement speaker at St. Mary's College. American poet Theodore O'Hara, whose Bivouac of the Dead is still read at military funerals and posted in national cemeteries, was an alumnus of St. Joseph. Others included Philadelphia-born John McGill, who would serve over 20 years as Catholic Bishop of Richmond, Virginia. There were also 2 U.S. senators, 2 U.S. representatives, 3 presidential cabinet members, Secretary of War, Attorney General, and Postmaster General, and 3 state governors. For its part, St. Mary's students would include future governors Proctor Knott and Edwin Morrow, Archbishop John L. Spalding, a driving force in the production of the Baltimore Catechism and the Catholic University of America, Archbishop Martin J. Spalding, leading light in 3 of the provincial councils of Baltimore, 1843, 1846, and 1849, in 2 of the plenary councils of Baltimore, 1852 and 1866, and in the First Vatican Council in Rome, 1868 to 1870, and Cardinal Joseph Bernardin, Auxiliary Bishop of Atlanta, Archbishop of Cincinnati and Chicago, and recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. All went to St. Mary's College. Another common denominator was the presence of those preeminent educators, the members of the Society of Jesus. They served at each college for about 13 years. St. Mary's, 1833 to 1846, and St. Joseph, 1848 to 1861. Father Cruz writes that these were Jesuits of the Missouri province who for a brief time also offered instruction at St. Ignatius Institute and St. Aloysius College in Louisville. They also established St. Louis University in 1818 and Xavier University in Cincinnati in 1831. During this period, Catholics in the Northeast of America had no colleges. That changed when Father Augustus Thébault became the last Jesuit president of St. Mary's College and the first president of Fordham University in New York. A phoenix-like quality which these two colleges seem to have shared shows itself in their later years as it had in their earlier years. For its part, St. Joseph College would close by order of the bishop in August of 1889 due to low enrollment and financial difficulties. Its buildings would continue to have valuable use in the life of the neighboring in the neighboring cathedral and community. Sorry. So we're talking about the closing of the schools. St. Joseph, the buildings, of course, are still there. Let's see. Its buildings would continue to have valuable use in the life of the neighboring cathedral and community. In 1915, a group of teaching brothers, with the inspiration of St. Francis Xavier, Jesuit successor to St. Ignatius Loyola himself, would open a boarding school and a day school with secondary education curriculum for boys. This was, of course, St. Joseph Preparatory School, which served until 1968. St. Mary's, too, welcomed another religious order after the Jesuits left. The Congregation of the Resurrection provided its priests and brothers from their base near Kitchener in Ontario, Canada, who from 1870 continued to offer an undergraduate liberal arts curriculum for men until 1929. From then until the close of the college in 1976, its students were men preparing for the priesthood in the dioceses of Kentucky and several other states. So within less than a decade of his arrival as ordinary of the Diocese of Bardstown, Benedict Flagey had surpassed his goals. He had 2 convents, a bustling seminary, and a shiny new cathedral, as well as 3 colleges, a double handful of parishes, and a growing number of dedicated priests serving them. He even had an auxiliary bishop. His first permanent home, St. Thomas, continued along with the complex at St. Joseph to be the hub of his still vast diocese. As the cathedral opened and began to be regularly used in that momentous summer of 1819, Flagey not only made that property his residence, but also moved the senior division of his seminary students there. Once again, we see the adjectives major and minor come into play. Minor seminary study is generally understood as the combination of secondary and junior college curricula, in today's terms, high school and junior college, toward the associate degree, with concentration in the classical languages of Latin and Greek. Major seminary would begin with 2 years of undergraduate curriculum with a major concentration in philosophy toward the baccalaureate degree, followed by 4 years of graduate study, which, though its concentration would be theology, would also include church history, sacred scripture, homiletics, and preaching, ethics, canon law, and other elements comprising a master's degree or its equivalent. Doctoral level study, when it happened, would be typically, though not always, after ordination. The cathedral property then was not only the bishop's residence, but also the location of the major seminary and St. Joseph College. The Poplar Neck campus was the site of the minor seminary, the parish, and other programs described above, and the residence of Bishop David. Father Howlett tells us that Bishop Flagey, even after moving, would return for short stays at St. Thomas when he needed some rest and recovery from travels and travails. Hallett quotes from Flaget's diary, referencing Bishop David's musical skill, which he put to good use in composing and performing hymns and chants. Quote, "Their knowledge of church music at the minor seminary suffered no drawback," unquote. Hallett also attests that, quote, "the choir had the accompaniment of Clemmy Johnson's fiddle, which he brought from New Haven. This Clemmy Johnson, along with his nephew Sylvester Johnson, would become benefactors of the St. Thomas Orphanage, yet another of the ministries that developed at Poplar Neck as the seminary shifted its location later in the century." Before leading this study of St. Thomas, St. Joseph, as they thrived in antebellum Kentucky, we should consider several other names of major figures who were part of this scene. Our glimpse of the life and ministry of Fathers Byrne and Elder as a pair of early priests and educators is certainly not an isolated model. We saw earlier links between Baden and Nearest, Fournier and Salmon, David and Flaget. There is, of course, biblical inspiration for the model in the gospel accounts of the synoptic evangelists. Quote, "Jesus called the 12. The Lord chose a further 72 and sent them out 2 by 2. You find this in Matthew 10, Mark 6, Luke 9. Not perhaps an eloquent, but surely a convenient way to review some of the development of the American church in this early period, these pairings form a way to get a picture of this rural locale of central Kentucky, which served as a watershed of leadership for the propagation of faith, scholarship, and ministry. Clyde Cruz writes, quote, "Just as Catholicism learned valuable lessons from the American and frontier experiences about tolerance, liberty, and pluralism, so the frontier found values in Catholicism that it revered and needed. Tradition, solemnity, and the love of learning, sacramentality, and community." Unquote. What follows here is a cast of characters who were associated with the Diocese of Bardstown by birth, education, or service there as they moved on to leadership roles in other parts of the growing nation. There were 2 Fenwicks. Edward Dominic was the Marylander educated at the English Dominican College in Belgium, who was in the initial group arriving at St. Rose in 1806 and who served missions in the Bluegrass region. He was ordained in 1822 as the founding bishop of Cincinnati, the first diocese to be established after Bardstown in the Midwest. He served Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, and the upper Midwest until his death in 1832. His younger brother, Benedict Joseph Fenwick, was also born in St. Mary's County of Maryland, became a Jesuit, and served as president of Georgetown University. He became the 2nd Bishop of Boston, where he served for over 20 years, establishing, among other institutions, the University of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. Another pair of brothers, Francis Patrick Kenrick and Peter Richard Kenrick, were born in Ireland, but arrived in America in this expansive first quarter of the 19th century. Ordained a bishop in St. Joseph's Cathedral, Francis would serve Philadelphia for over 20 years and Baltimore for another 12. Peter served as bishop and archbishop of St. Louis for over 50 years. Another religious order of men who came to Kentucky was known as the Congregation of the Mission. More commonly known as Vincentians after St. Vincent de Paul, they are also referred to in the older writings as Lazarists because of the priory of Saint Lazare, where they were established in Paris. Among their number, several served at the Kentucky seminaries and the neighboring parishes. They are identified in the sacramental records by the letters CM after their names. Fathers Joseph Rosati and Leo de Necker served as bishops in the jurisdictions of Upper and Lower Louisiana, known afterwards as the archdioceses of St. Louis and New Orleans. The Vincentians moved on to establish seminaries and other ministry centers in Missouri and much further west. Two other priests who served in Kentucky and became archbishops of New Orleans were Louis William Dubourg and Napoleon Perchet. Two of Bishop Flaget's earliest associates and dear friends were Gabriel Richard and Simon Broutet. Father Richard served heroically in Illinois and Michigan, but died of cholera a few months before Detroit was named a diocese in 1833. Bishop Broutet, who was originally educated in medicine, served as the founding ordinary of the Diocese of Vincennes, 1834 to 1839. Another pair from this clerical hegemony was Jean-Baptiste Purcell and William Henry Elder, who served in an episcopal ministry for a total of over 100 years. They were the second and third bishops of the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. In addition to the pairing with his Jesuit brother, Edward Fenwick can be considered part of two pairs of Dominican bishops in the Midwest. Thomas Grace served as Bishop of St. Paul in Minnesota for 25 years, unusual for that period. He resigned at age 70 and lived another 13 years. Two more Dominicans, Pius Miles and James Whalen, served respectively as the first two bishops of Nashville, Tennessee, after it was established as a diocese in 1838. All of these men, plus Joseph Alemany, Archbishop of San Francisco, spent all or part of their formative years at St. Rose Priory in Washington County. The first two of about a dozen American bishops who can be truly considered homegrown in Kentucky are John McGill and Ignatius Reynolds. Though born in Philadelphia, McGill had moved with his parents to Bardstown before reaching 10 years of age. He attended St. Joseph College and studied law in the offices of three-term Governor Charles Wycliffe. He was admitted to the bar and practiced successfully in New Orleans and Bardstown, where he was clerk of the Board of Trustees. Giving up that career, he served on the faculty of St. Joseph College while beginning theological preparation for the priesthood. After ordination by Bishop David, he served parishes in Lexington and Louisville, and for 8 years managed the Catholic Advocate, the forerunner of the Archdiocesan newspaper, The Record. Appointed bishop in October of 1850, he was consecrated at St. Joseph Cathedral on the 10th of November by the bishops of St. Louis, Nashville, and Vincennes for service in Richmond, Virginia, where he died in 1872. But the title of the first bishop born in Kentucky goes to Ignatius Reynolds, whose birthplace was a farm just north of Bardstown in August of 1798. He attended the local seminaries, but did later studies at St. Mary's in Baltimore, where he was ordained in October of 1824. His first assignments in the diocese were professorship at the major seminary and service in the local parish. Within 3 years, he was president of the seminary and pastor of the cathedral. He followed Bishop David as ecclesiastical superior of the Sisters of Charity, and in the pivotal year of 1841, he was appointed Vicar General of the diocese. On the 19th of March of 1844, he, along with John Henney, fellow alumnus of St. Thomas, became a bishop in the Cathedral of St. Peter in Cincinnati. Bishop Purcell of Cincinnati, and along with Miles of Nashville and O'Connor of Pittsburgh, consecrated Henney for Milwaukee in Wisconsin and Reynolds for Charleston in South Carolina. The aging Benedict Flagey was in attendance when these two men were made bishops. If one family name has to be selected as the most prominent in the Catholic ecclesiastical history of Kentucky, it would surely have to be Spalding. And the final pairing in this sequence of names, which is by no means complete, would be the most prominent two of the Spaldings. Martin John Spalding and his nephew John Lancaster Spalding, for their intellects, influence, and achievement, must be considered in these pairings, although each will have further coverage in this memoir, as will their cousin Catherine. And by the way, each of these clerics has a brother who can claim significance in this clerical history. Both Martin John and John Lancaster have a brother priest, who in addition to carrying the name Spalding, is called Benedict Joseph. So, who is this pair of Benedict Spaldings? One was born in Lebanon, Kentucky, 11 years after his older brother John Lancaster, in Louvain in Belgium. He was ordained to the priesthood in 1875. When his brother became Bishop of Peoria, a new diocese in Illinois, he made an official departure to serve with him there. John Lancaster Spalding appointed Benedict Joseph Spalding to the post of Chancellor of the Diocese and Rector of the Cathedral of St. Mary's, positions in which he served until his death on the 28th of November of 1887. There was precedent for this. Benedict Joseph Spalding, younger brother by 2 years of Martin John Spalding, served as pastor of the Cathedral of the Diocese of Louisville. On 2 different occasions, he served as administrator of the diocese, and there was considerable interest, especially on the part of the priest, that he succeed his brother as the ordinary. However, it did not happen, and his life had a most tragic end. On the 2nd of August of 1868, there was a terrible fire in the cathedral residence on 5th Street in Louisville. Father Benedict Spalding was relieved of his awful suffering when he died 2 days later. Although Peoria in Illinois is not an archdiocese and never has been, Pope Pius X in 1908 gave John Lancaster Spalding the title of Archbishop in recognition of his many contributions to the Church in America. Similar to an honorary degree, the appointment is called titular bishop. The title may seem artificial, but the contributions are quite real. One day I was shopping in a used bookstore in downtown Cincinnati, and I discovered a shelf full of volumes of essays, aphorisms, poems, and reflective works, as well as biographies of Isaac Hecker, founder of the Paulist Fathers, and of the author's uncle, Archbishop Martin J. Spalding. John Lancaster was a participant in the plenary councils of Baltimore and was largely responsible for the production of the Baltimore Catechism, mainstay of religious formation for 4 generations of American Catholics. A true intellectual and literary giant, J.L. Spalding was enormously instrumental in the founding of the Catholic University of America. Appointed by Theodore Roosevelt as a commissioner for the arbitration of a national coal strike, he was eulogized by that president in 1916. Quote, "There was no finer citizen in this country, nor man who represented better what all good Americans should wish to see in their religious leaders." John Lancaster Spalding and his brother Benedict Joseph were sons of Leonard and Mary Jane Lancaster Spalding, who made their home on what is today called Radio Station Road, just north of Lebanon in Marion County. Leonard's older brother Richard and his wife Henrietta Hamilton farmed near the Abels and other Marylanders at Calvary to the southwest of the county seat. That was the birthplace in 1810 of Martin John Spalding and his brother Benedict Joseph in 1812. Of course, it is with the accuracy of retrospection, the performative development of the farm boy who would reach the premier position for a Kentucky priest in 19th century America could hardly have been more perfectly constructed for the Mozartian phenom that was Martin John Spalding. Before reaching the age of 12, he had entered formal academic training as one of Father Burns' student professors. Mathematics was his strong suit at that stage. 4 months after his 16th birthday, he entered major seminary for philosophy studies at Bardstown. Perhaps with the intentionality of grooming his chosen successor, perhaps with the guidance of the Holy Spirit, Flagey admitted Spalding to the clerical state and gave him minor orders 2 months before his 18th birthday. Only 2 years later, he sent him to Rome to study theology. The particular seminary was called the Urban College of the Propaganda, and its purpose was to train priests from and for the dioceses of mission lands, which designation America would have until 1908. Over a 10-day period beginning on the 3rd of August of 1834, Martin Spalding received subdiaconate, diaconate, and priesthood in Rome from the cardinal prefect of the seminary. He had just turned 24. By Christmas of that year, he had come home to Flagey's appointment of him as pastor of St. Joseph Cathedral. And at 28, he would succeed George Elder as president of St. Joseph College. We will see more of the meteoric rise of the protege, but we must return to the story of the mentor and the fruitful years of his patriarchal career. And that's where we'll start next Wednesday with part 4, learning more about the work of Bishop Flagey. That's a wrap for now. Thanks, everybody. And oh, by the way, sorry, Karen. Tomorrow, the 8th, is when we expect to hear from Archbishop Kurtz. His plan is to present to the priest of the Archdiocese and to his College of Consultants, a group of advisors, his plan for the reopening of the churches. So if I am made privy to that, then I will tell you more about it on Sunday morning at 8 o'clock. God bless everybody. Thanks.